Hi everyone, welcome to RPA Explorers channel.
Last video we have seen a simple use case using Excel connector and its method, and in today's video we are going to look at the second use case using the same. So first let's understand the use case. I have a sample Excel which is combined data and it has sheet 1. In sheet 1 we have one column which has the combined data of date of birth and its email ID separated by the hyphen. So our task is to split the combined data into three different columns. So the output should be like this. We have to add three different columns and the respective values into the column A. So I hope you understand the use case. For example, when you take the first column, it has to get the date of birth and then write it in the date of birth column. Then from the email ID it has to get the first name and last name, then write it in the column B, and the complete email address which should be right in the column D. So now let's see how you can achieve this using Studio. So let's go back to the Studio. I have a SEP connector being added again, which is combined data. So now let's double click on this. So first method is to use open to open the Excel, and I'm going to open it. So now let's provide the file path. I'll quickly copy the path, loop through the Excel, for which we are going to use the for each or the for loop. Let's go with for loop. And also the second task is to add three different columns B, C, D and its header. So now let's add the headers to them, for which I am going to use set cell values. Click on this and type for cell. I am going to use the set cell values and the sheet name is sheet 1. Now the next step is to add the values, for which we are going to select the cell names, which is B1, C1 and D1. I am going to use B1. So B1 is the name, so I'm going to keep string, and C1 is date and time, so and it's an email address should be string. So now let's click on OK, and you can double click on this to provide your values. So it should be static, so the header name should be name, and we'll add the date of birth, which is DOB, and in the D1 it should be email address, so I'll keep email. And in order to just provide the index to the for loop, we should know the rows count from an Excel, right? So I'm going to use the rows count activity, and the index always starts from 2, as we have the first header, so it starts from the index 2. I'm going to start the index from 2, and then for 2 you can pass the value from the row. So the next task is to get the values from the column A, for which we can use the row values. So I'm going to use get row values, and let's provide the sheet name. Create a variable for the index. You can right click on this and you can click on create variable. You can this, you can call it as Excel index. So differentiate, I'm going to add L, so let's tag it, and you can map the same variable to the row number. So you can click on this gear icon at the top, then you can add your columns. So I'm going to read from the Excel, so we have to give this, and I'll click on OK. So now that the next step is to split the data. So now let's understand how you can manually split the data, and we can implement the same in the studio itself. For example, let me take this. So the first thing is to get the date of birth. Okay, so let's see how you can get the date of birth from this format. Since we have the same format on all the data in the column A, so you can use a constant method to get the date from it. Okay, so how you can get this? So first idea is to split it into two string. So when you split it into two strings, you will get the first string as this, and your second string would be this. So first method is using a split function, then you are using a split into two components. So once you split, it became two different things, right? So then you can, from the list, you can pick the first index which will give you the first date of birth. So for DOB, we have to split it using the character hyphen, then you can take the 0 in. So which will give you this date of birth. Okay. And in the list you have the index 1, so which is the email address. So in order to get the email address, you can use the same thing. So in order to get the email, you have to use this, which will give you this. Okay, so now the next task is to get the name from the email address. So now it's simple that we have the email address which is present in this split function, so we'll use the same function, so which is name. So when you use this, you'll get this data, and then again if you think of, we have a character which is at the rate, then again we can split this, right? So when we split this, we again get two strings in the list. So first strings contains the first part, and second the email address, I mean the part of the email address. So again we can use the split function. So the now the character would be the at the rate. So when you split it, your target is to get the first part, which is the name. So I'm going to pick the name. So this will give you this specific value. But when you think of, the name never contains any full stop or any additional character other than space, right? So let's assume that it is concatenated with the first name and last name using this full stop. So let's replace this with space. In that way we'll get the complete name as first name and last name. So now let's again use the same function and we'll get the actual name. For example, when you use this, you'll get this, and we have to use a replace function. So what you have to replace? You have to replace this full stop with a space. That's it. So this will give you this specific value. This is what exactly we need, and let's try to implement this concept in a studio. Okay, so let's go and the studio, and we'll have this open. So first we have to get the name, right, which is in the column B. Yes, so we are going to use get row values, sorry, set row values to set your values. So let me take set row values. Yeah, we have this rows to set the values. So we are going to set the values to column B, C and D. So let's select them from, which is D. So again I'm going to use the same type, so it should be, so let's free, so let's, and okay, and let's provide the sheet name now, which is sheet 1. And for the row number, it should come from the looping, right? So we are going to tag it to the Excel. Okay, so in order to implement this, there are different ways in which you can implement it in the studio. For example, when you go to the toolbox and when you type for string utilities, so under string utilities you can see different components available. For example, we have split, replace, we have substring, and then we have two lowercase, two uppercase. Like, we have different components available to implement this. Let me tell you how you can implement this with so when you take a component, you have to use the split component, which will give you a list of string. Then you have to loop through it. In the looping, you have to get the first index, then again you have to use a for loop, and you have to use a replace function, string function, substring functions and everything to get this done. But in this video we are not going to look at this way, which uses multiple components to implement this. So let's look at a different way which might be very easy. So let's see that. Now right click on this, you can see the different options available there, and we are going to use this transform data. So let's click on this transform data, and when you click on this, you can see that we have an option to change the scripting language. So first you have to like enable this. So when you enable this, you can choose the different languages, and I'm going to continue with the VB.NET. So let's see how you can write the scripting here. And if you see, by default for every component you have this which is return value, so it's basically returns the value to pass you're trying to pass. Okay, so here this value, it defines the input value. So in this case, it takes the value which is from the A column, because we are going to pass the value from A to B. So now the value which defines the column A, and from the column A, what we are going to do, we are going to take the name. Okay, so yeah, B is for name, right? So what we have to do, from the name we have to split it. So we have the notepad open, and if you see, in order to get the name, first thing is to split it, right? So we have to split this into two index, 0 and 1, and from the 1 again we have to split it with this index, and then we have to take the 0th index. So now let's see how you can actually get the value. Instead of directly doing it in the actual things, let's use a message box to see the different output, then we can actually do it in here. So I'm going to close this. Okay, I'm just enabling this and closing. So now let's take a message box. So I'm going to use show, will pass the connector, and then again you can right click on this to transform your data value, which here the value which defines the column A. So we can enable the scripting, and I'm going to split it. So first, now just split with this hyphen, and then we'll see the output, and I'm going to take the 0 index, and this will give you a list of strings. So I'm just going to take only the first value. Now let's click on OK. Where is this? Okay. So now we should pass the value which goes from column A, the breakpoint, and we'll start the process. Okay, let's see the output. So now the output, which is the date, so we'll click on OK, and again you can get the date for every column. So from the Excel, it is splitting, and it is giving us the first index, sorry, the 0 index, and then it will give you the first index, which is the email ID. So now let's stop this. So this, let's see how you can get the email ID. So I'm going to click on this transform data, and now what we have is the just the date of birth. So we are going to remove the 0 index, and from here we are going to take the index 1, and this index 1 will give you the email ID, right? So let's run it and see. And the email ID which is at the first index. So now is to get the name. So let's do the same again, and I'm going to split with a rate, and we have to take the index 0, right? So let's see, and I'm going to run this. Okay, so now what we are getting is the first part of the first part of the second index, which is this John dot Doe, and we'll get Emily dot Smith, right? So let's check the value. Yes, what you are getting is this, but in real time, for names we don't have this full stop or anything apart from space, right? So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to just remove or replace that with a space. So this is the actual output, and to the actual output I'm applying a replace function to replace my dot into a space. Okay, so now let's see how you can write this. I'm going to run from here. So okay, so now you can see in the exact way what we want, but also there are one more thing be considered, right, of a way how you exactly write your name in real time. For example, when we write, we'll start with the uppercase, and then we have a space, and for the last name again we have a uppercase, right? So you can do with this scripting. I already have a scripting for that, so we are just going to use the same scripting, and also I keep the scripting in the description box as well. You can refer it. So this is okay. So I'm just using the same thing, which will give us this actual string without uppercases. I mean the output what we got now, I'm storing it in the name, and then we are just splitting it the string by space, so which will give us two different strings, right? So first we'll have the first name, and the second index will have the second name, and then I'm just looping through them, and When I loop through, I'm just converting into uppercase, and I'm using a substring functions as well. And finally, I'm joining them and returning the final string. So I'm going to copy this, add it over here. So it's all about how you want your data to be displayed. So let's run the bot. Okay, so this is what exactly we need. Final step is to write it in the column. So C so since all these parameter take the values from column A, so we have to pass the input from A to this. Okay. At the last step, we have to close the Excel after processing all the data. So I'm going to use a close method for that. Let's run the bot. So this is completed and it closed the Excel as well. So now let me open the output. And also, if you notice, the date of birth might be in the different format. So because we are reading in terms of a date and time and setting the values into a date and time, you can try switching the data type here. Like you can change to object or string, and you can see if you're getting the expected output. If not, you can directly do this format cell to format the cells in the format you want. So yeah, that's something that you can do. We have completed the use case, got an idea how you can reduce the usage of more activities and how you can achieve it in just simple activities. This is not make use of this transform data properties for any of your component. In that way you can reduce the usage of multiple components. And I hope you guys find this use case helpful, and in the coming videos we are going to explore even more methods and more use cases. And thank you so much for watching this video.